North Korea has reportedly transferred 50 Hwasong-17 intercontinental ballistic missiles to Iran. Not spare parts, not technical blueprints, but 50 fully operational and combat-ready ICBMs. These are the same systems Pyongyang displayed through Kim Il-sung Square as proof of its strategic deterrence against the United States, now delivered intact to a regional power that already possessed the targeting doctrine, operational intelligence, and institutional readiness to use them against some of the most heavily defended military infrastructure in the Middle East. If you value analysis that moves beyond headlines and examines the deeper operational and strategic realities behind these events, subscribe and stay with me. Hit like, share this with anyone trying to understand what is unfolding in the Middle East, and leave your thoughts in the comments because I read them carefully. Now let's break this down. Within just 36 hours of the transfer being integrated into Iranian operational planning, the strike was launched. By sunrise, 30 Israeli military bases had reportedly been destroyed, not lightly damaged, not temporarily disabled, but leveled. The Hwasong-17E's massive payload capacity, capable of carrying more than 1,000 kilograms of high explosives or precision submunition warheads, combined with its terminal accuracy and MIRV capability, created a destruction footprint that Israeli base hardening was simply not built to survive. Nevatim, Ramat David, Tel Naf, Hatzer, Palmakim, and Stot, the critical pillars of Israeli air power, were rendered non-operational in a single coordinated overnight assault. 18. Additional ground force bases across the north, center, and south absorbed simultaneous strikes that destroyed command facilities, ammunition depots, fuel reserves, and vehicle maintenance infrastructure so completely that reconstruction may require years rather than weeks. What we are looking at here is not a tactical setback, it is the dismantling of a national military structure in the span of one night. The consequences extend far beyond Israel alone. The transfer of ICBM-class weapons from one sanctioned state to another, carried out in open defiance of the export control systems the United States spent decades building, and then producing operational results that overwhelmed the most advanced defensive architecture in the region, represents a major shift in the assumptions that have shaped the modern international system. The world that existed before this transfer is no longer the same. What replaces it is now being defined in the burning aftermath of bases that once formed the backbone of Israeli military capability. The key questions now become unavoidable. How did 50 Hwasong-17 missiles penetrate every layer of Israeli defense and produce destruction across 30 military installations in a single night? What does the strike pattern reveal about the operational doctrine Iran is now employing? What exactly is the Hwasong-17, and why has it become one of the most strategically important weapons systems currently in service? What does its transfer mean for future proliferation calculations that Western planners once considered manageable? Why has Washington's response remained so restrained despite the scale of the event, and what does that restraint reveal about the actual limitations now surrounding American power projection? Finally, when 30 IDF bases disappear in a single overnight strike, what direction does this conflict now take? The operation reportedly began at 1:47 a.m. local time when 42 Hwasong-17 missiles launched simultaneously from dispersed firing positions throughout central and eastern Iran. The remaining 8 missiles were intentionally kept in reserve for follow-up engagements against targets identified during the strike itself. From a professional military standpoint, this structure reflects planning at the highest level. Rather than firing every missile at once in a maximum volume salvo, Iranian planners used a measured initial wave supported by reserve capacity designed for adaptive targeting. The flight time from Iranian launch zones to Israeli targets is estimated at roughly 12 to 15 minutes for the Hwasong-17E's trajectory profile. During that short window, Israeli early warning systems reportedly detected the launches, classified the incoming threats, and attempted to coordinate a defensive response. But the realities of ICBM engagement geometry made large-scale interception almost impossible. Arrow 3, Israel's highest-tier interceptor and the only system theoretically capable of engaging ICBM-class threats, is believed to exist in quantities of fewer than 100 interceptors against an incoming wave of 42 missiles, even. An ideal engagement doctrine requiring 2 interceptors per target would make comprehensive defense mathematically impossible. The target allocation itself reveals the priorities built into Iranian operational planning. 12 missiles were assigned to Israeli air bases, with multiple warheads directed toward each of the 6 key facilities, including Nevatim, Ramat David, Tel Naf, Hatzer, Palmakim, and Stot. The destruction at each base reportedly disabled runways, hangars, fuel systems, and command infrastructure simultaneously. The Israeli F-35I Adir fleet based primarily at Nevatim, with dispersal elements at Ramat David and Tel Naf, was effectively neutralized. Not simply because aircraft were destroyed, but because the infrastructure required to operate those aircraft ceased to exist. Another 18 missiles targeted IDF ground force installations, divisional headquarters, ammunition storage sites, fuel distribution centers, and maintenance facilities across the northern, central, and southern sectors. Northern Command at Safed, Central Command at Ramla, and Southern Command at Beersheba reportedly absorbed direct impacts within the opening moments of the strike. The cumulative result was the operational decapitation of the IDF's regional command network during the exact period when coordinated response capability was most critical. The remaining 12 missiles in the first strike wave targeted the command and intelligence infrastructure connecting Israeli military operations across every sector. The Kiryat Defense Compound in Tel Aviv, home to the IDF General Staff and Central Operational Command facilities, reportedly sustained multiple direct impacts that forced surviving leadership into deep underground shelters while above-ground infrastructure became unusable. The Glilit intelligence complex, associated with Mossad and Signals intelligence operations, was struck with a level of precision suggesting long-term targeting preparation. Camp Rabin, one of the IDF's main command and control nodes, was reportedly rendered non-operational within the first 90 seconds of the impact sequence. Over the following 6 hours, the 8 reserve Hwasong-17 missiles were used against facilities identified through post-strike assessment as still partially functional. These included command centers that had shifted to backup, operations after primary node destruction, and radar systems activated in response to the initial attack, exposing their operational positions. The use of reserve targeting demonstrates a doctrine built around sustained strike pressure rather than a one-time barrage. By dawn, 30 Israeli military installations had reportedly been destroyed or rendered unusable. In a single night, the IDF lost the operational foundation of its air power, its regional command infrastructure, its core command and control network, and the intelligence facilities supporting operational planning. From a military perspective, this represents what comprehensive operational defeat looks like when achieved through precision strike warfare rather than traditional ground combat. The Hwasong-17, presented by North Korea as the centerpiece of its strategic deterrence capability, is considered one of the most consequential weapons systems currently deployed anywhere in the world. The transfer of 50 operational missiles to Iran represents not just an increase in numbers, but a complete transformation in strategic capability that introduces a level of threat the Middle East's defensive systems were never designed to absorb. The technical characteristics of the Hwasong-17 begin with its sheer size, measuring around 24 meters in length and carrying a launch weight estimated above 100 tons. It is among the largest road-mobile ICBM systems ever fielded. That scale allows it to carry payload configurations built around MIRV technology rather than single warhead designs. One Hwasong-17 can deploy multiple independently chargeable warheads towards separate aim points, effectively multiplying the impact of every launch far beyond traditional ICBM calculations. 50 such missiles could potentially deliver more than 150 independent warheads, approaching the scale normally associated with strategic nuclear exchanges even when equipped with conventional payloads. Debate over the missile's accuracy has long divided Western analysts, with assessments ranging from highly inaccurate to operationally sufficient. The strike pattern described in Israel appears to settle that debate in favor of operational effectiveness. Multiple impacts across 30 installations suggest a circular error probable within several hundred meters, accurate enough for large-scale military infrastructure targeting where blast radius compensates for remaining error margins. The interception challenge posed by the Hwasong-17 also deserves serious attention. An ICBM flight profile includes a boost phase, an exo-atmospheric mid-course phase, and a terminal re-entry phase, each requiring different defensive approaches. Arrow 3 was specifically designed for exo-atmospheric interception during the mid-course phase, but the intercept window against targets traveling near Mach 20 lasts only seconds. Coordinating enough interceptor launches against a 42 missile wave within that time frame would exceed the operational capacity of nearly any existing defense system. MIRV technology complicates matters even further because every individual warhead becomes a separate target during terminal re-entry defensive requirements. Therefore, scale not with the number of missiles launched, but with the total number of warheads incoming, a burden Israeli interceptor inventories were never designed to handle. One of the most significant aspects of this entire situation is the speed of operational integration implied by the strike itself. The Hwasong-17 is not a weapon system that can be effectively deployed without extensive training, software integration, targeting preparation, and command and control coordination. The fact that Iran reportedly executed a coordinated 30-target strike within 72 hours of the transfer becoming public strongly suggests the integration process had been underway long before the missiles physically arrived. Iranian missile officers were likely already trained on the system, targeting databases had likely already been prepared. For Hwasong-17 operational parameters, and institutional planning for such a strike capability had been developing quietly for an extended period. North Korea's decision to transfer these missiles, combined with Iran's decision to use them almost immediately at this scale, reflects a strategic calculation that the risks of restraint had become greater than the risks of demonstration. Two heavily sanctioned states operating under long-term Western pressure appear to have independently concluded that the deterrent structure designed to contain them no longer carried the credibility it once did. The American response to the destruction of 30 Israeli military facilities by North Korean-supplied Iranian missiles has, by historical standards, been remarkably restrained. There have been official statements of concern, diplomatic consultations, and symbolic gestures, but no meaningful military escalation. No carrier groups repositioned toward direct confrontation. No major strike packages launched against Iranian missile infrastructure. No emergency military assistance sufficient to compensate for the scale of Israeli losses. Having spent years inside military and policy institutions, one can recognize what the silence beneath official statements often means. It reflects the understanding that every available escalation path carries costs the current political and economic environment may be unable to absorb. Direct American strikes on Iranian launch infrastructure risk triggering a Strait of Hormuz closure scenario that global energy markets could not sustain. Such a situation could drive oil prices into catastrophic territory and create economic shockwaves far exceeding the military objectives involved. The American economy, already burdened by inflation, debt pressure, and political division, is not positioned to absorb that level of disruption. Washington understands this, Tehran understands this, and both sides are making calculations based on that shared reality. The weapons transfer itself creates additional complications. American precision-guided munitions inventories have already been strained by support for Ukraine, Pacific commitments, and years of stockpiled drawdowns that were never planned around simultaneous global crises. Rebuilding Israeli capability after the destruction of 30 bases would require massive diversion of resources from other theaters, a decision carrying political costs. Washington may not be prepared to accept the arithmetic of current American production capacity versus global operational demand simply does not produce an easy solution. Diplomatically, the situation is equally difficult. The transfer of ICBM-class weapons from North Korea to Iran represents a direct failure of the export control architecture the United States spent decades constructing. Fully acknowledging the scale of that failure would create serious political consequences domestically. The muted language surrounding the transfer therefore reflects not only strategic caution but political necessity. It is important to understand what this restraint actually signals. Washington's response is not limited because American leadership believes the event lacks significance. The response is limited because the escalation options capable of meaningfully changing the situation may no longer exist within current political, economic, and military constraints. That distinction matters. It suggests that the limitations on American power projection demonstrated over recent years are no longer temporary, they are structural. For Israel, the consequences are immediate. The IDF has reportedly lost 30 operational facilities in a single night. Rebuilding that level of infrastructure could take years, and the gap in operational readiness during the meantime would be enormous. Meanwhile, the United States, traditionally viewed as Israel's ultimate security guarantor, appears through its actions to be signaling that the scale of support available may fall far below what the crisis demands. Israeli leadership is now being forced to process that reality in real time, and the strategic conclusions emerging from that process may reshape the future of regional politics in ways not yet fully reflected in public discussion. What stands out most analytically in this entire situation is the contrast between two very different national security models. Iran spent decades constructing the institutional framework necessary to execute a strike like this. Not the missiles themselves, those came from North Korea, but everything required to employ them effectively. The trained missile personnel, the targeting intelligence, the operational doctrine, the command and control systems, and the political willingness to absorb the consequences were all developed internally under sanctions designed specifically to prevent such capability growth. The North Korean missiles became the final component inserted into a structure that was already operationally prepared. Without that institutional foundation, the missiles alone could never have achieved this level of strategic effect. Israel's model developed differently. Israeli military technology is highly advanced, and the IDF possesses real operational experience, but many of the foundations supporting Israeli military power depend on external supply. The F-35 program came from Lockheed Martin. Patriot systems came from Raytheon. Precision-guided weapons relied heavily on American supply chains. Intelligence support often flowed through American systems. These imports delivered major capability advantages, but they also created dependencies that became visible the moment uncertainty appeared regarding the continuity of external support. When the Hwasong-17 strike destroyed Israeli infrastructure, surviving aircraft reportedly could not operate effectively because runways, fuel depots, and maintenance facilities had been destroyed. Defensive systems expended interceptors at rates far beyond realistic resupply capacity, intelligence, and weapons support that Israel may have assumed would arrive at emergency scale now appears far more limited in practice. The strategic lesson embedded in this contrast is already being absorbed globally. Imported advanced weapons systems cannot fully replace the indigenous capability to design, sustain, and independently employ military power. Once external support slows or disappears, the borrowing state discovers that it never truly possessed autonomous power, only temporary access to someone else's, and the timing of when that support is reduced is almost never aligned with the needs of the dependent nation. My assessment of where this situation now stands is that we are witnessing the operational confirmation of a strategic transition Western policy circles have struggled to fully acknowledge. The transfer of ICBM-class systems from North Korea to Iran, carried out despite decades of sanctions enforcement and resulting in the destruction of 30 military facilities belonging to America's closest regional ally, represents a direct challenge to the unipolar international order that emerged after the Cold War. That order rested on the assumption that American military and economic dominance could enforce international norms surrounding strategic weapons proliferation, sanctions enforcement, and the limits of military escalation. According to this narrative, that assumption has now been operationally disproven. North Korea transferred the missiles, Iran accepted them, Iran used them. 30 Israeli military installations were reportedly destroyed, and the United States has not demonstrated a response capable of reversing the outcome within its existing constraints. From this perspective, the enforcement structure has revealed its limits in front of every government watching around the world. The implications stretch far beyond the Middle East. In Pyongyang, the transfer of Hwasong-17 systems to Iran likely reflects a calculation that the costs of doing so have become lower than previously assumed, and the results of the strike may reinforce that belief. North Korea has effectively demonstrated that its strategic weapons inventory carries diplomatic and commercial value that can be activated when circumstances favor it. That changes future calculations regarding similar transfers under different geopolitical conditions. In Moscow and Beijing, strategic planners who have long argued that supporting states opposed to American influence would gradually weaken the foundations of American global power may see recent events as validation of their assessments. The pace of future military cooperation among Russia, China, North Korea, and aligned partners could therefore accelerate across the developing world. The broader lesson appears equally significant. The barriers to acquiring strategic capability may now seem lower, while the willingness of major powers to support that capability appears greater than before. Nations that spent decades developing autonomous systems under hostile conditions are now watching their long-term investments pay off. At the same time, states dependent on American security guarantees are being forced to reconsider the practical limits of those guarantees under real combat conditions. What we may be witnessing is not simply the decline of the unipolar era, but its conclusion. The emerging world may be defined instead by multiple centers of strategic power, shifting alignments, and a very different relationship between major powers and regional allies. That environment could become more dangerous in some ways and more stable in others, but it will unquestionably demand strategic thinking far different from what institutions built for the previous era were designed to provide. 30 IDF bases reportedly destroyed overnight, 50 Hwasong-17 ICBMs transferred from one sanctioned state to another. An American response constrained by structural limitations Washington cannot openly acknowledge. A regional ally confronting the reality that its security architecture may have been comprehensively defeated. These are not the signs of an ongoing strategic era continuing unchanged. They are the signs of one chapter ending while another begins in the ruins of what once represented Israeli military dominance. The final question is this: we have now seen what can happen when a regional power possessing the institutional capability to employ strategic weapons receives those weapons from a willing partner. We have seen the apparent limits of American power projection when challenged by adversaries backed by capable allies. We have seen what 30 destroyed military facilities look like, not as a hypothetical scenario, but as a claimed strategic outcome. What remains unseen is how Israel adapts to operating from a position of severe military disadvantage for perhaps the first time in its modern history, and how the broader Middle Eastern security structure reorganizes itself around the reality established by this strike. Leave your thoughts in the comments because I read everyone carefully and they sharpen my understanding. If this analysis gave you value, share it, hit like, and subscribe for serious strategic coverage of this conflict. The next update is already being prepared. Stay aware.